Guided only by a series of random coordinates, Morehouse began to see images of a small, enclosed room.
I realized that there was a person here, a living, breathing organism in this room. And I'm beginning to feel exactly what this individual feels at this target site. Scared, sick, in pain, hurt, anguished, turmoil.
I want you to move forward in time. About 24 hours. I want you to access the mind of this person.
Traveling through time and space, Morehouse believes he penetrated the hostage's cell. This classified report states he was able to confirm Higgins was alive but in great distress. He was later executed.
Opening these conduits into the unconscious mind is a tremendous blessing and a tremendous curse. What do you do when you go home at night? What does your wife say to you? How was your day at the office, honey? Certainly you bring home far more than a briefcase full of papers. And that's the downside of being involved in this very bizarre world of psychic spying.
Late one night in December 1988, all members of the remote viewing team were summoned for an emergency session.
What's up?
I don't know, they called us all in.
You gotta be kidding. They need all of us?
Yep, the whole team.
But that never happens. Serious stuff, huh?
It sure is. And you can forget that party of yours. We're here till we finish.
Your coordinates are 0307 and 7102. Access the target and describe what you see.
There was a tremendous amount of pain involved with this particular target. We saw ourselves standing in the cabin of this aircraft. And we kept watching this aircraft explode. And then we would be asked to go back again and to relive it again, go right back to the moment just before it exploded again and be able to try to pinpoint where this explosion took place.
Hours later, the target of the mission was revealed to the team.
What we were looking at was Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, which we were forced to relive over and over again. And it was literally within hours of that aircraft exploding in midair that the remote viewers were providing information to the Defense Intelligence Agency that stated that there was an explosion that took place in the front left quadrant of this aircraft, below the passenger line and in front of the wings. And in fact, when the evidence was made known, that was indeed where an explosion took place.
The remote viewing program takes a more sinister turn, putting David Morehouse under tremendous pressure. He has to decide whether he is prepared to use his gifts as a weapon of death. U.S. Army officer David Morehouse has undergone intensive training to become a psychic spy, but the onset of the Gulf War forces him to search his own conscience.
In November 1990, Saddam Hussein threatened to destabilize the Middle East. America's need for military intelligence was paramount. At Fort Meade, David Morehouse and his colleagues were now asked to use their psychic powers to a more sinister end.
Saddam Hussein actually accused the United States openly in the media of using or employing psychics against him. And everyone looked at him and just thought, what a madman. But in actuality, we were indeed targeting him psychically.
Morehouse vehemently opposed this new strategy known as remote influencing. He believed it was an unjustifiable use of the remote viewer's abilities.
When I realized that we're reaching out to kill with it, I felt that I had a moral and an ethical responsibility to violate my security oath and to tell the story about this to the American people.
Morehouse decided to go public, but the tale of the Pentagon's involvement in psychic espionage was already beginning to emerge. In 1995, the CIA admitted the existence of Operation Grill Flame and its predecessors. In the wake of the negative publicity which followed, the remote viewing unit was closed. Morehouse continued with his campaign to reveal the true story and met the full force of the intelligence community.
The entire military structure of the Criminal Investigation Division came after me and unraveled every aspect of my life. This took a tremendous toll on my family. My children were beside themselves. They were emotionally disturbed. My wife and I would be separated as a result of this. But I persisted in telling this story because I felt that truth was the only thing that I had that was an anchor and a tether in my life.
Faced with the possibility of a 40-year jail sentence for breaking his security oath, Morehouse reluctantly chose the only alternative available to him.
Tearfully, with my father standing by my side, I tendered my resignation, ending 18 years of more than honorable service to this country. It cost me a family, and it cost me a career to tell the truth.
Despite his humiliating expulsion from the Army and the breakup of his marriage, David Morehouse remains a passionate supporter of remote viewing, but he's determined it should be used for humanitarian rather than aggressive purposes.
For so long, this was just hidden away. It should be something that's brought out to help all of humankind, not being sequestered away as a weapon of war or as an espionage tool.
Carteret, New Jersey, a residential suburb on the outskirts of New York. Earlier this year, a local man went missing.
We weren't concerned for about the first couple days that there was any suspicion of foul play, but then after we actually got into the investigation, then it became a little bit of a more serious matter. We tried everything, we looked everywhere, we talked to everyone. In this case, it was like he just disappeared off the face of the earth.
The investigation was running into the ground. As a last resort, Deputy Chief Nagy approached David Morehouse. He persuaded him to come to Carteret to hold a remote viewing session at the police station.
I had no idea what it was that I was looking at. I just obviously knew by nature of the fact that I was working with a police department that it obviously had to be something sinister.
Here are the coordinates. 6571 9304. Access and describe the current location of a missing person.
I began stepping into the ether. And the longer I stayed in there working on the target, the more clear the vision became about what the target looked like. And I just started unraveling this thing, looking through the eyes of a dead man.
He was in there for about 90 minutes. He came out almost a completely different person. It was as if he worked an 8-hour shift.
Gentlemen, this is Dave Morehouse. As you know, Dave's helping us with our investigation. He's just concluded a remote viewing session on the case, so listen carefully.
Thanks, Dennis. The first thing I want to say is that remote viewing is not infallible. I don't want you guys thinking it's the answer to all your prayers, because it isn't. But it can give you that extra bit of information, that missing bit of the jigsaw to push your investigation.
He came out with what we call an intelligence product. Now bear in mind that he had no idea of knowing that this was a missing child, a missing an adult, a senior citizen who might have lost their memory, a male, a female. He had none of this. He just knew missing person.
The missing individual is, I believe, white, middle-aged male, local to this area. I got a strong feeling that he's the victim of a homicide. I also got a very strong sensation of water, a sense of drowning. Maybe the body was dumped in a storm drain.
If, as Morehouse claimed, the missing man had been murdered and dumped in the waterways near Carteret, the chances of police finding his body would be slim.
It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. I mean, there's just, you know, acres and acres and acres of undeveloped waterfront property here. If a person's body was dumped in here, it could almost never be found.
But one of Morehouse's sketches was uncannily precise. It was to shift the focus of the investigation to one spot in particular.
The sketch that really shook me up was of standing, watching myself in apparitional form stand amongst the reeds on the shoreline of this inland waterway. And I remember seeing this fleeting image of this large building with a smokestack.
You got a river here. This theme of water won't go away. Reeds here, factory complex. Does this look familiar to any of you?
Hey, what do you think? This could be that spot by the abandoned dock.
It was a very frightening thing for me to reveal that sketch to the police officers and to have probably half of them stand up and say, I know where this place is.
The police immediately took Morehouse to the area of the Carteret waterfront which resembled his drawing.
I found the spot and said, this is it. This is where I stood. This is where I stood in apparitional form in the ether and looked across this water to that factory, to that power plant, and said, his body is somewhere around here.
The police searched the area but found nothing. 3 weeks later, the body of the missing man surfaced a few hundred yards downstream, precisely where the current would have taken it had the body been dumped at the site of Morehouse's drawing.
Whether it was Major Morehouse looking through the eyes of a dead man or being in the same location, the fact is there was a remote viewing to that location. No one knows how it works, they just know that it works. That a random set of 8 numbers can produce a scene remote in time and space, location and date.
It's chilling to me to come back to see how accurate the remote viewing session is. And it's frightening. It's absolutely frightening to think that this potential has been locked up as a weapon of war and as an intelligence collection tool when this is really where it ought to be used, is to assist law enforcement officers here and throughout the world to solve cases such as this one.
2 months later, David Morehouse has returned to Carteret.
Now, if you go back to this training process that we talked about,
He's been invited back to teach police officers the techniques of remote viewing.
whatever this is a photograph of inside of here, that's not what you're going to be looking at. You're not going to work this photograph. You're going to transcend time and space. These guys deal with life on the streets, and now you're talking to them about entering an altered state and stepping into the ether and gleaning, targeting data, etc. But I was amazed how well these police officers did. They were accurately describing targets remote in time and space that they had never seen or heard or had no idea.
A lot of people will think you're crazy or you're a lunatic or you're off the wall, but all I could say is if they took the course, they were trained in it, at the end of the training, they'll know. They'll be convinced.
A freak accident in the Jordanian desert had repercussions that no one could have predicted.
If I could turn back time to 1987 in that desert floor, I would duck. But fate and destiny didn't present me with that.
The apparent psychic ability that was released eventually led to Morehouse losing everything he held dear: his family, his career, his name. But he recognizes that there are benefits from his involvement in the murky world of psychic spying. He claims he has a rare gift which he is happy to pass on to others.
Remote viewing is the greatest gift that we can give human beings. We can either wander through the next 50 years of life somewhat lost and confused, or we can have this ability to become hyper-intuitive and to know the answers to things without really knowing how we know it. And that's what I see the future being.
The police at Carteret, New Jersey, have yet to complete their remote viewing course. Only then will they be able to put David Morehouse's extraordinary claims to the test. H.G. Wells would have loved it. Good night. Before Galileo, popular wisdom decreed that the Earth was at the centre of the universe. Now we know that we're at the edge of our galaxy, a rotating spiral of hundreds of billions of suns like our own, each with the possibility of having planets that could sustain life. But if there is life, what chance is there of it being like ours? We only built the first internal combustion engine about a century ago. Is it possible that an alien civilization has managed to cross the vastness of the galaxy to our planet? Some say there is evidence that they have. Our first story tonight takes us to an area of Scotland which has become known as the Falkirk Triangle.
West Lothian, a small industrial region in central Scotland. The locals are a down-to-earth breed, not the sort you'd expect to spin tall tales and leave themselves open to ridicule. But their community has been gripped by a most unearthly phenomenon.
Hurry up, look, it's a UFO.
I'm trying to get it focused. What do we do? As I started underneath the craft, it dropped like a shimmering curtain of light.
I want the Ministry of Defence to send somebody in here now and give the people an answer.
Councillor Billy Buchanan is a popular local figure who's championed many causes, gaining a reputation as a man of the people. But even he was stunned when locals came to him with stories of strange objects in the skies.
Well, I started in 1992. I received a knock at the door one evening, and there was a friend of mine who I've known for a number of years. He told me that he had an encounter on the back roads of Bonnybridge. He couldn't describe the format of it because the light was too intense, but it was hovering above the road, it was soundless, and he watched it for 10 minutes and it moved off at incredible speed. I put a small news item in the local newspaper, and that's when it began.
This thing just appeared out in a farmer's field, and it was jumbo jet size.
Really luminous, bright, objects just sitting there. I was terrified.
Red lights at the top, clear lights in the middle, and blue lights at the bottom, and they were all spinning.
From there, the whole thing just snowballed. We had hundreds of people coming to the office or phoning us up to say we've seen things as well, and it became a sort of national story.
In the first week, I think I had about 400 to 450 either telephoning or coming to my door telling me that they had seen something.
One of the local residents keeping watch and logging claims of sightings was UFO researcher Malcolm Robinson.
Our society checked through various avenues open to us to provide a rational explanation to account for these UFO sightings. We checked firstly with the police. We also checked through various airports. Then we also checked with meteorological stations to see if there were release of any weather balloons that may have overflown the area. And lastly, we checked through the Ministry of Defence to see if there were any aircraft manoeuvres. Once we have checked through all avenues open to us and we cannot find a rational explanation to account for a given sighting, then obviously that particular sighting must be classed as an unidentified flying object.
The intensity of sightings is unbelievable. People call this the sort of Falkirk Triangle.
On July the 30th, 1994, Andy Swan, a 27-year-old cable layer with Scottish Power, had what he says was a close encounter.
We went up to the park to have a look at a lightning storm that we were having that night. I had noticed this object heading toward the school building. I was intending to come along and have a better look at this object from behind. As I was travelling along the road, I seen this object coming from the left-hand side. It came down so low, right in front of the car, so close that I thought I was going to hit it. And I had to put my brakes on hard to avoid it. And I got out of the car, and I watched this thing just coming over the top of me, where it just landed just above the field. This thing just, suddenly, just like a bug, it just shot up right across the top of me.
Author Stuart Campbell believes such sightings are merely tricks of the light.
The atmosphere is capable of producing suffusing mystical effects of varying types, and almost anything can be believed of the shape of such objects, starting with an astronomical object, a planet or a bright star. Very many of the distortions that cause people to see a UFO out of an astronomical object is the temperature inversion.
This occurs when a layer of hot air becomes trapped under a layer of cold.
Just as you see a mirage on a hot road in the summer, you can get a mirage in the sky due to these effects.
tricks of the light or alien spacecraft, whatever they were, more and more UFOs were being reported all over central Scotland.
We headed out about 10 o'clock and just chatting away about general things.
Thought you said your radio was it, man. Tune it in, will you?
We went around this bend in the road heading towards Tarbracks. Something caught my eye just above the line of the top of the windscreen.
What the hell's that? That thing there?
I never ever seen anything like it in my life. It was black in colour. It was like shiny. It had 3 parts to it. It was circular. I really panicked. I didn't know what to do.
Gary, for God's sake, drive! Drive through
As I
it!
started underneath the craft, it dropped like a shimmering curtain of light. I braced myself.
As I went underneath it, the whole road and surrounding area just completely disappeared.
I'm like it's in a void of blackness. I didn't know where I am.
I had the sensation that the car was lifting. Because I know for a fact the wheels weren't turning. I mean, there's no traction. All of a sudden, it was just a big burst of bright light. The car sort of kind of like slammed onto the road.
Gary, for God's sake, drive! Go, go!
And I ran to Katrina's house and I was banging like mad on the door.
Gary was hysterical. He knows I've got 4 kids. There is no way that he is going to come to my door, pound on it, push me right out the road and enter the way he did. Something dramatically happened to him. He was blown.
They say the journey should only have taken 30 minutes, but took 2 hours. So how could they account for the lost time?
I'm an hour and a half missing out my life, and I don't know how or why.
Gary and Colin turned to regression therapist Helen Walters, hoping she might hold the key to explaining what happened on the road to Tarbracks.
Hypnotic regression helps you recall the incident that you take them back to around that time. And it brings to light what their problem is, to be able to handle it in their daily life and remove some of the fear.
Dark! I just saw this thing coming towards me, these things. And I was just terrified.
What can you see?
Men! And all I remember is just pure fear, absolute terror.
Can you see something, Colin?
It's near my face.
I mean, the next thing I can remember was like
Don't want it near.
some kind of instrument coming down from my right-hand side.
Away!
With a long, thin needle straight into the centre of my eye.
Away!
Even under hypnosis, you could see my eye was pouring with water.
Could this be a genuine memory? And could the claimed abduction account for the missing 2 hours?
Hypnosis has been used many times to discover what people went through in some UFO experience. Unfortunately, hypnosis is a dangerous and flawed technique. People are regressed to the events that they think happened to them, but unfortunately, hypnosis is rather prone to produce fantasy more than fact. And so fictitious tales emerge.
The story had a galvanizing effect on local opinion. It seemed everyone had a UFO story to tell.
Well, I just saw this bright light. I thought it was a helicopter at first, and I just kept, and then all of a sudden I said, "Oh, Barry, there's a UFO."
Barry,
I'm telling you, that is a UFO. I'm serious, it's a UFO.
It's a bright light.
Barry, that is a UFO.
When he wanted to pull over, I said, "No, just keep going." And he says, "No, we'll pull over."
We ran out to the back of the vehicle, opened the boot up, and the camcorder was lying there. So I dived in and I grabbed it. I was trying to zoom it in and whatever, and it was, then I lost it a bit.
Look at the colours.
Of course it is.
Trying to get a clear picture of it so people would believe me if I had it on evidence, on tape.
It started off like around football, really bright, sort of tilted, went to its side, like a saucer shape.
It was all a matter about, I'd say about 300-400 yards away.
It was just like above the rooftops, kind of the houses. And then all of a sudden it just disappeared.
For Billy Buchanan, this image, along with the other photographic evidence, was proof enough to take the fight for an investigation to the highest level. Earlier approaches to the then Prime Minister, John Major, and the MOD had been rebuffed for what the government saw as a lack of evidence.
We've had numerous videos, numerous photographs. We've had all these people that's came forward and given us their accounts of what they've seen. If that's no tangible, What do they need? Do they need some sort of flying saucer or something to land in the middle of Bonnybridge?
Me and Colin, in a court of law, we would be taken as two good witnesses, but because it's such a subject like this, it's looked on as if we're mentally disturbed or something else, and it's just no fair. We're only looking for answers like everybody else, nothing else.
What we are dealing with are low-level, close proximity UFO sightings, sightings above cars, above rooftops, and if that's not a threat to national security, then we don't know what is.
I'm writing a letter at this moment to Tony Blair, the new Prime Minister. I'm saying, you get in here and give us an explanation. Now, it might be a logical explanation or a rational explanation, but we demand an answer.
So far, Councillor Buchanan's extraordinary request for a government inquiry hasn't been taken up. Meanwhile, in the Falkirk Triangle, residents report that the number of alien visitors is still increasing. But then, of course, that includes the English tourists who've come up to see what all the fuss is about. Up until the 13th century, bears roamed the British countryside. They were dangerous beasts and would quite cheerfully maul people to death. The wild boar was another feared animal, capable of the odd disembowelment. By the 17th century, both species had been hunted to extinction. Today, with its pretty villages and ordered patchwork of fields, we like to think of the British countryside as a safe and gentle place. But could it be that a wild and savage beast still stalks the dales of Durham? They're locking up with extra care in Durham these days, since a mystery visitor first began to disturb their peace.
It happened so quick as I went up to it. It stood up, turned around and went into the hedgerow. When it was very early, there was no other traffic about. That's exactly what it did. Just got up, turned around and went.
As a local farmer, Heather Allinson knows the usual animals of the region well, but this, she says, was something different.
We have dogs and cats on the farm, obviously, and animals. We see deers, badgers, and it was nothing I've ever seen before. What struck me about it was its very shiny, glossy head, its features. It had big, bright eyes, and just the power of it as it got up and went.
We've had about 180 sightings to date. Some of them have been very, very good sightings by doctors of biology, by countrymen who you would expect to be able to recognise anything that you see in a countryside.
Sergeant Eddie Bell is Durham Police's wildlife officer. He's been on the case of the mystery sightings since they began over 10 years ago.
Mobile phone, she's up at the A68. There's been a fox cub knocked down, now it's injured.
It was something different to what people would normally see, or they wouldn't have reported it. But we hadn't a clue really what it could have been. It was, I suppose, mystical really.
One of the earliest sightings was made by lorry driver Robert Davis. His encounter happened at Fishburn Cokeworks in 1986.
It looked about 5 to 6 feet, maybe it's a bit less. It was sandy coloured. And it had a dark sort of like front, maybe it's off the coke dust. And it just walked light.
Fishburn Cokeworks, now closed, provided Eddie Bell with the first clue as to the identity of his quarry. It appeared that the beast had jumped a 10-foot coke heap in one bound as it hunted for prey.
On the top was a number of dead seagulls that had been hunted and eaten. So whatever it was big and very powerful and very athletic. It was, I think, the last place on earth you would expect to find any sort of wild animal.
Bell discovered a network of tunnels on the site where he suspected the beast might have its lair.
Going into an animal's den is obviously very frightening, especially when you don't know what's there. was perhaps 4 feet square, running maybe 20, 25 yards back. And it really was dark and a bit like going potholing. I was going in the only way in or out, and if anything was at the other end, the only way out was to come past me. So it was a little bit worrying.
Bell's courage paid off. In the dust lining the tunnel floor, he found the tracks of a large animal.
They were big enough that you would think, well, I hope there's nothing at the end of this tunnel if I go in to have a look around.
These are the actual prints found by Bell in 1986, but he had to wait 7 years for the next hard evidence of the beast stalking Durham. In September 1993, the village of Walton had an unwelcome visitor, and this time it was after bigger prey.
We were in bed, it was about 1:30 in the morning, not quite asleep, as you know, and the security lights came on. So I immediately had a look out of the window and stayed there for 2 or 3 minutes and couldn't see anything. The dogs weren't barking, so I thought it's nothing really untoward, so went back to bed. One of the 3/4 grown lambs in the paddock next door had been very effectively slaughtered and just about wholly eaten.
This was not the kind of sheep kill local farmers had ever seen before.
There was no sign of any blood on the grass, and I thought it was a bit strange because I'd never seen a sheep worried before in them circumstances. Usually there's a lot of blood about, but in this case there wasn't any.
I've seen plenty of dog worrying, having worked as a policeman in a sheep area for a long time, and it was completely different to any of the dog worryings I've ever been to.
But this time the beast had left behind a series of clues to its identity. First, there was the sheep's carcass.
It was a very, very clean kill. There was no sign of blood. There was no chewed bones. There was actually sort of raspings of flesh on the fleece, as if something like a cat had licked the meat from the actual animal.
Next came an unusual paw print found on the edge of the village. This was examined by Scenes of Crime officer Ian Wilkinson.
It was a fairly big print, which was unusual for this area, and the actual print that was made in the soil was quite firm. It was quite noticeable, so that struck me straight off.
Wilkinson took this cast of the print. It was clear from this that they were dealing with a big cat, something approaching the size of a lion. Finally, there were the droppings found beside the carcass. These were sent to an expert for analysis.
It was actually positively identified as the dropping of a large cat. The exact words were, which I'll never forget, were, had I found it on the Serengeti, I would have said it was from a leopard, but I would suspect that it's actually from something like a puma.
The cast made by Ian Wilkinson was checked against this one, taken from a puma in a zoo. They were a close match.
The puma lives in a very, very wide variety of habitats, ranging from high mountains down to rainforest and dry deserts. There's absolutely no reason that such a superbly adaptive animal couldn't exist in moorland and whatever we have to offer here in Durham.
But if a puma could survive in the British countryside, how did it get there in the first place? Today, there are strict controls on the ownership of exotic pets, but this wasn't always the case.
You could phone up Harrods and order a panther or an anaconda to keep as a pet, as long as you had the money to pay for it. But in 1976, the Wild Animals Act came into force, and that required the keeping of animals under much more secure conditions. And rather than have their pets put down or transfer them to a zoo, it's likely that they actually release them into the wild.
There is no official acknowledgement of the Durham puma. The carcass from the Walton sheep kill was sent to the Ministry of Agriculture for post-mortem. But even as a police officer, Eddie Bell was not allowed to see the ministry's report. But Eddie Bell doesn't need the ministry's say-so. He's got the evidence of his own eyes.
It was Christmas Eve, which is why I remember it. I was due back at work at 2. I was coming home, it was a very frosty night. I was fairly tired. I was looking forward to getting home because I was frozen stiff. And I was about 2 miles from home, and ahead of me in the headlights, I actually saw the reflected eyes of an animal.
What's that? What is it? It's not a deer. It can't be a fox.
And as I came up on it and I got a better view in the headlights, it was a puma sat at the roadside.
It is. It's a cat.
I stopped maybe 5 yards past it, and I got out the car, and it was still at the roadside, although by then it had realised I'd stopped and it had got up, and it had started off away from me, and it went through a hedge and across a ploughed field. And I watched it go, and I really felt I wanted to go after it, but there was nothing I could do. I had no camera, no torch, nothing to record it with, and at the end of the day there was nothing I could have done even if I'd caught it. So I marked the position where I saw it with a stick, and I continued home, and I went to bed. And I remember waking up and thinking, I've just had the strangest dream. I must have been really tired. And then I thought, no, it wasn't a dream. I did see what I saw. And I got in the car and I went straight back down the hill, and there was the stick where I'd left it. And I knew then that I hadn't actually dreamt it. I had actually seen a puma.
Pumas live for around 15 years. The first sighting was reported in 1986, so if there is one at large, it might not be around for much longer, and the sighting should stop soon. Unless, of course, there's a pair of them breeding out there. Good night. Good evening. The death of a body is not the end, the soul lives on. So followers of the Jewish faith believe. The Quran promises that the pious and the righteous will be in delight, and the wicked disbelievers will be in the blazing fire. And Christians have their own ideas of heaven and hell. But on one central point, all religions unite. Death is only the beginning of a new existence. Hard evidence for this belief is at best elusive. But in our programme tonight, a retired bingo caller from Birmingham claims to provide that evidence.
You soldiers all that now are
This is it. This is it.
Peter, Bob and Carl are brothers from Birmingham, all on a mission.
Oh, this is definitely the church, without a shadow of a doubt.
Their quest to unearth details of Peter's claimed past life as John Raphael, a soldier in the English Civil War of the 17th century.
While I live not where I love.
About 20 years ago, I really became interested in hypnosis. My brother Peter's daughter-in-law agreed to come along for a session.
Well, she dropped out for whatever reason, and something was telling me to go for it.
Testing, testing. And I was very hopeful that we may get something.
And just relax. Relax. You're now drifting back through your childhood, beyond to a previous life. Where are you? I'm going to church. What's it called? And what's happening around you? St. Michael's. I'm praying with my wife Elizabeth and little Izzy. What year is it? 1638. Peter, tell me what your name is and what work do you do?
John Raphael. I'm a foot soldier in Cromwell's army.
Fire! Me, a parliamentarian foot soldier with the 1st Foot Regiment. And I thought to myself at the time, when people are going to hear this, they're going to think that I'm 2 bricks short of a full load.
Peter and Bob began their quest for the truth about Peter's past life in the tiny Nottinghamshire village of Halem.
There's the church, this is it.
You even got the name right. Gosh.
And these trees weren't here, I'll tell you that, 350 years ago. Oh, this is definitely the church, without a shadow of a doubt.
We went into the church. Luckily, it was open. And as soon as Peter entered, he said, "There's something wrong."
Oh, hang on a bit, hang on a bit, hang on a bit.
What's wrong?
You see where that altar is up
Yes,
there?
yeah, yes.
Well, I tell you, 350 years ago, the altar was this end.
This end?
So,
why would they
I mean, you can see the pews have actually been changed completely around.
Baffled by the fundamental change, Peter and Bob sought out church warden Richard Brown.
That altar's been there since the church was built, what, 700 or over years ago. It's never moved. The altar has been there all the time.
However, working on a hunch, Richard uncovered old plans of Halem Church.
But in 1890s, the church was altered. So when John Raphael walked into the church, in his day, he would look to his right, and there would be the altar. So Peter would be correcting what he was saying.
Are you okay, Peter?
Encouraged by this success, the brothers scoured the graveyard.
We were looking for a name. We were looking for my name, John Raphael. I was drawn to one particular grave.
What's wrong with it then,
I'm not happy about this grave at
You're
all.
not happy about what?
I feel as though I'm going to throw up. Now, I've looked at a lot of the other graves, and I have no problem at all, but this one is bothering me.
We bent down and we scratched away the first piece of moss where we hoped the initial would be.
It's not going to be a J shape.
That is a J coming up. That's a J.
And then an O, H-N, and by this time I was getting very excited.
Go on, Rob. Try the next. Try the next. If the next one's an R, well, I don't... Jesus. And the first initial that came up on the surname was R. And I thought, oh dear, oh dear. If I'm correct, if it is my grave, the next one will be an A, won't it?
It can't be right. It's too good.
I could do without an A.
It's coming.
I don't want to know this.
Oh dear. No, it's an O, it's an O.
I was quite relieved that it wasn't me.
You can't get much closer, can you?
You can't.
It seemed the trail had gone cold. Peter agreed to undergo further regression to see what details might emerge of his army exploits.
Beginning to see where you are.
I was asking general questions to Peter to gather information for our research. He suddenly became agitated and moving about on the seat he was on.
Tell me, what's going on?
The soldiers. Oh, the Vikings.
I remember that myself and the rest of the pikemen, we were lined up in a straight line. And we had been tanked up. Things were a bit hazy with all the beer we'd poured down our throats. I remember that we had our pike staffs at the ready. We attacked Newbury on the 17th of September, 1643.
What else do you see, Pete?
All these soldiers are fighting.
He appeared to be in a somewhat desperate fight and struggle. He was throwing himself about and shouting.
Then everything went black.
The Battle of Newbury is recorded by historians and at the time has been fought on the 27th of September.
But it was definitely the 17th of September.
So we've got a shortfall of some 10 days from what's claimed. One reason for that might be there was a change in calendar in 1752 when we actually went from the Julian Gregorian calendar and we lost 10 days.
Another beautiful day for it, lads, as usual.
Spurred on by another hit, Peter and Bob were joined by younger brother Carl as they expanded their mission to include Scotland. Believing he'd been stationed in the border regions, Peter and the brothers were determined to track down his campsite.
This has got to... There's nothing on here.
This is it. This is it. I was able to
you.
pinpoint where it was.
Definitely. This is
And
it.
as we got to the edge of the embankment, that's when the ravine appeared. And my initial reaction was, it hasn't changed at all in the last 350 years. I couldn't believe it.
There's this river. You see, it's just a stream. The river used to be quite high. You couldn't miss it.
I remember we would sit around the campfire, we'd play cards, sing songs. We'd also carve initials on trees.
When waking, can I take a moment?
However, despite Peter's enthusiastic claims, local historians believed no such campsite existed in the Haddon area.
To stand so stern.
Well, the brothers came to see me about 3 or 4 years ago and told us about this campsite, but our records had no information about campsites at all.
Come on then, guys. Let's go look.
Let's have a look at this.
Undeterred, the brothers armed themselves with metal detectors to see what evidence they could unearth.
And on bringing us to this site, we've started to do some metal detecting. And these are some of the articles, or the artefacts that are coming out of the ground. We appear to have 2 musket balls, possibly from the Civil War period. A love token, which is used to be a coin, but had an initial stamped in it. Left hand, I've got part of a broken spur.
Well, they were all scattered around.
All down here.
Most of the foot soldiers were along here.
So could these artifacts mean that the brothers had discovered a previously unknown Civil War campsite?
We're actually left with some quite convincing information, I think. Musket balls, a spur here, some of the buckles and things, do certainly argue that we're looking at a campsite where people could have camped overnight during this Civil War period.
The next discovery was when Peter's story was featured on television.
I was watching The Time and Place on television, and the camera went to a man that I recognised as my father in a previous life.
Peter.
We were in the hospitality suite, and after a few minutes, the producer said to me, Pete, there's a phone call for you, if you can take it in that booth next door. He said, it's from your daughter. Now, at that particular time, I thought that he meant my real-life daughter, Karen, who lives in near Loughborough. Well, I picked the phone up.
And I said, I'm really not a loony, and I'm phoning from London, and I was your daughter in a previous life.
Now, my first reaction was, this woman is stark raving mad. I said to Barbara, do you remember on either your 5th or your 6th birthday on the farm? She said yes. I said, can you remember what I made you? She said...
for my 6th birthday, he made a horse out of wood.
I said, that's correct. I said, what else?
And put green and yellow ribbons around it.
Happy birthday!
Could Barbara Hartfield really be the daughter of John Raphael? Peter is convinced.
She's mentioned a couple of things that she couldn't possibly have known about unless she was my daughter.
Back on the road, Peter and Bob head for London and the Clink prison in pursuit of their latest lead.
This could very well be the place.
Well, it's apparently on the side, the Blackfriars.
entrance.
You said Blackfriars.
When I was thrown down the steps, it was very similar to this, Rob.
And you said down, didn't you? This is down.
Ooh. Arrested after a pub brawl, Peter suspects he was jailed in the Blackfriars area. Rosemary Smith, lecturer at the Clink Museum, joined the brothers.
Some trouble started with some of the locals in there. I remember furniture being thrown around, and the next thing I remember is coming in a place very similar to this. This might be the right place. Being thrown down some stone steps, and one rips into my thigh, and the pain was terrible.
If you were caught drunk and disorderly, which you were,
yes.
Or if you were a debtor, this is the place that you would have been thrown in.
We're still searching for more evidence, and I know that the truth is out there. This is my quest to come to a conclusion. We've got to find John Raphael, and the evidence is out there somewhere, and we will find it.
If Peter Hume really did have a past life, maybe he'll have another life after this one. He might even visit Birmingham one day on a quest to learn about the life of Peter Hume and end up watching a rerun of this programme. medieval French scholar Nostradamus wrote prophecies based on dream-like visions. It seems that much of what he predicted, including world wars and space travel, has come true. But in fact, Nostradamus wrote rather generally about things that would happen in hundreds and even thousands of years' time. It's tougher for today's prophesiers. The public demands specific information about short-term events. And if prospects are catastrophic, the modern-day Nostradamus must raise the alarm.
In early 1996, the IRA were preparing to break their 18-month-old ceasefire and unleash a new campaign of terror on the British public. As they made their preparations, one man named Chris Robinson was experiencing a series of disturbing dreams.
At the end of January, I was starting to dream of terrorist movements. And on the 1st of February, I had a very vivid dream where somebody spoke to me and said to me, "You better do something about this, you better send this to the security services." So I then decided that, never mind a ceasefire, I'm going to take action.
To the police, Chris Robinson was no ordinary member of the public. For 6 years, Regional Crime Squad Detective Chief Inspector Alex Hall was allocated to be his police contact. Alex Hall remembers that Chris was very insistent that an attack was imminent.
He'd said that he felt very strongly that the ceasefire was about to end and that he was starting to have a lot more dreams about dogs, that is to say, the IRA, and people being injured.
Chris Robinson dreams in symbols. Dogs mean IRA terrorists, for example. But in this case, the symbols were mixed up with tantalizingly specific details about the location of the impending attack.
He was seeing a bridge, a concrete bridge, pillars, tall buildings, by the waterside, that type of thing.
The Canary Wharf bomb, which ended the IRA ceasefire, was planted underneath a railway bridge by water near tall buildings. Unfortunately, the dream had not been specific enough to enable the police to avert the disaster. Ordinary people with no previous experience of psychic phenomena can also have premonitions. For years, Caroline Harrison was haunted by a dream of drowning at night.
I've always had this dream since my early 20s, and I'm floating up to my neck in very dark black water, and I can see lights in the distance, and there's no one around that I can see, and I know that there's not going to be any help coming.
In January 1996, Caroline and her boyfriend Steve were backpacking through Southeast Asia and planned to take a ferry to an island off Sumatra. Because of her dream, it was to be a daytime journey.
We never ever went on a boat at night time if we could help it. This boat was not meant to leave in the night. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but it got delayed. So we wouldn't have got on it otherwise.
The ferry set off as night fell. Shortly after leaving port, it started to list heavily and then turned over with very little warning.
I was just sort of waiting for Steve to catch up with me, to come out of the cabin, out of the room. And the water just came from behind me.
I took 2 steps towards the door, and the next thing I knew, I felt water around my ankles, and instantly it was over my head. And I swam up and I bashed my head, and I could feel that my face was pressed up against the ceiling, and there was no air pocket at all.
It seemed like I was just swimming for ages to get to the surface, and all I could see were these white bubbles in front of my face, and I was like thinking, God, you know, how much more have I got to swim to break to the surface? When I eventually did, there was like lots of people around, all screaming. I was just wondering where Steve was.
I don't know how long I was swimming around for until I found a door. I shot through that, and I just kept swimming until I hit the surface. I felt somebody grab me around the neck. We struggled and spun round. We sank under the water, and then he was gone.
Caroline!